მოგესალმებით ყველას. მე ვარ ივერი კეკენაძე, საერთაშორისო ურთიერთობათა დეპარტამენტის უფროსი თბილისის სახელმწიფო კონსერვატორიაში და მალმოს მუსიკის აკადემიასთან ერთად წარმოგიდგენთ საერთაშორისო დისკუსიების სერიას თავისუფლება სამუსიკო განათლებაში. ჩვენი დისკუსიის დაწყებამდე აუცილებლად უნდა აღვნიშნო ის მძიმე განწყობა, რომლის ფონზეც ვატარებთ ამ პროექტს. თბილისის სახელმწიფო კონსერვატორიის საერთაშორისო დეპარტამენტის სახელით სოლიდარობას ვუცხადებ ჩვენს უკრაინელ მეგობრებს და კოლეგებს და გმობთ რუსეთის აგრესიას, რომელიც არ არის უცხო საქართველოსთვის. მტკიცე მხარდაჭერა და აქტიურობა სჭირდებათ დღეს უკრაინის მამაც ერთ საქართველოსგან, ვინაიდან დღევანდელი ომი უკრაინაში არ არის მხოლოდ ერთი ქვეყნის ომი მეორის წინააღმდეგ, არამედ ეს ევროპული დემოკრატიის ომი ავტორიტარიზმის წინააღმდეგ, უკრაინელების, ქართველების და ევროპელების თავისუფლებისათვის. რაც შეეხება ჩვენს პროექტს, შეგახსენებთ, რომ ყოველ ორშაბათს 28 თებერვლიდან 4 აპრილის ჩათვლით 19 საათზე გაიმართება სესიები, რომელიც დაეთმობა უმაღლეს საგანმანათლებლო სფეროში თანამედროვე გამოწვევების განხილვას. დისკუსიებში მონაწილეობას მიიღებენ პროფესიონალი მუსიკოსები და უმაღლეს საგანმანათლებლო დაწესებულებების წარმომადგენლები მსოფლიოს 10-ზე მეტი ქვეყნით. Hello everybody and welcome. I'm Iveri Kekenadze, the head of Department of International Relations at Tbilisi State Conservatory, and in collaboration with Malmos Academy of Music, I'd like to present international panel discussion series, Freedom in Music Education. Before we begin the official part of our meeting, I'd like to state that we are horrified by Russia's barbaric attacks in Ukraine. Tbilisi State Conservatory strongly supports our Ukrainian friends and colleagues. We'd like to express our solidarity to Ukrainian partner institutions and Ukrainian people. We have the partner institutions in Kharkiv, National Kotlяревsky University of Arts, Ukrainian National Tchaikovsky Academy of Music in Kyiv, Nezhdanova National Academy of Music in Odessa, Lysenko National Music Academy in Lviv. We, of course, understand that Ukraine now needs everybody's support, strong support from the free Western allies, as the battle is now for general peace and freedom in democratic world. To come back to our discussion, I'd like to remind you that the 6 meetings will be held within the project and current challenges of the higher music education will be discussed. International experts, professional musicians, and the representatives of high educational institutions will be the speakers of the events from more than 10 countries of the world. Discussions will be live streamed and presented on the Tbilisi State Conservatory Facebook page every Monday at 4 CET from 28th of February to the 4th of April. The main topic of the first meeting is freedom in the classrooms, is the golden ratio. And our speakers for this meeting are Nino Žvania, she's a Georgian pianist and musicologist, Dina Leinster, professor of music theory and composition at Capital University Conservatory in Columbus, Ohio, US, and Danilo Mastertech, a pianist from Italy. I'm very proud to have you all here. And for the first meeting, we asked our participants to discuss freedom in the classrooms and so-called Western versus Eastern way of upbringing. Also, how do we present music making and music performance to the students at high music educational institutions? If the teacher is always a giver and the student is always the receiver. Also, the reactions on initiatives, interpretation, and non-traditional methods of teaching. So, our first speaker is Nino Žvania, and Nino Žvania studied piano and musicology at Tbilisi Conservatory and Robert Schumann Hochschule in Düsseldorf, Germany. She's the prize winner of various international piano competitions and the author of several scholarly works and a monograph. In 2020-22, she led the very first fundamental research project dedicated to the artistic research in Georgia that was financed by Shota Rustaveli National Science Foundation. Dear Nino, the floor is yours, and we'd like to hear from you.
Dear Iveri, thank you first of all for inviting me to participate in this very, very interesting series dedicated to the most topical and important issues of higher music education. But before I start talking about freedom in the classroom, I really have to say that there is nothing much I can do for people who fight now for their freedom. I mean, the people of Ukraine. But I really want to dedicate this speech to those courageous and brave women and men and kids who are right now suffering and struggling against Russia. And I just want to say that Slava Ukraine, Geroyam Slava. Now I'll go back to this topic, freedom and the classrooms. I will talk about this subject actually based on reflection upon my own personal experience as a teacher and supervisor at Tbilisi State Conservatory. I have been teacher for, oh my God, I can't believe, but almost 17 years. So I think I have the right to discuss this subject based on my experience. All meanings we know depend on the key of interpretation, writes George Eliot in Daniel Deronda. This sentence I got acquainted with about 10 years ago has not only changed my worldview, but also my attitude to the art of music performance, research, and teaching. Finding keys of interpretation has become the main task of my professional life, as well as life generally. Consequently, I do believe that the most important duty of a teacher is to teach students how to find those keys. First and foremost, the right keys. Though what is the right and what is wrong? Having supervised students in various courses, be it piano, new music ensemble, writing master thesis and doctoral dissertations, contemporary piano performance for 17 years, I'm still unsure whether we can talk about right and wrong interpretation of music. We live in the epoch of historically informed performance when interpretations of some great names of the past have been of question. At the same time, Willem de Kooning said once, answering the question, which painter of the past influenced him the most? The past does not influence me, I influence it. And that is true. Stockhausen does influence Beethoven, having performed and heard Brahms, Schoenberg, Cage, Reich, Stockhausen. We both intentionally and unintentionally bring those experiences into our interpretation of the great German composer. So what can I teach? How to sort problems out and how to solve them, how to practice, how to analyze, how to research, how to obtain the foundational knowledge, how to become independent step by step, and eventually how to find own key of interpretation, persuasive for oneself and more or less acceptable for others. Any student has to learn that. Any teacher has to supervise him, her on this interesting and challenging way. I had a wonderful teacher in piano at the State Conservatoire. Professor raised all of her students as independent musicians, encouraging them to think critically. She supervised us in individual ways, always taking into consideration our personal traits, abilities, skills, and interests. She always motivated us to offer our ideas and views on interpretation, and thus to become free-thinking professional musicians. At the same time, she was quite strict, demanding high-quality performance of any task, and we always knew there is no alternative to highly disciplined practice. That's why we all differed from each other in performance style. Many classes of some famous professors in Georgia and post-Soviet countries lacked and still lack this feature. Today, one would define her approach as a student-centered one, while the Soviet education and music education in particular was rather teacher-oriented, with all respect to some great teachers that Russian and Soviet piano school are based on. Thus, my approach to teaching is grounded on Professor Khubutia's ideas. All general rules, methods must be adjusted to an individual student, and the student should be encouraged to develop critical thinking skills. He, she should be able to question even the most sacred dogmas of the music world. I learned how to avoid dogmatism not only from my teacher. I have specific interest for contemporary art music, and this interest influenced my approach to performing and teaching as well. As a rule, I have to play pieces that are free of any performance traditions, and I have to literally discover them for myself and for listeners, relying mostly only on scores. It is performance traditions that quite often impose specific burdens on us performers when we have to interpret music of the past. Traditions sometimes tend to transform themselves into cliches that determine the art of performance in educational systems, art, music competitions, concerts, etc. These cliches are part of professional life of any musician. And as a teacher, I have to prepare my students for that life, especially taking into consideration the fact that some traditions are very valuable and important. However, I think step by step, students have to learn how to create their own interpretations, how to discover pieces by themselves. And my duty is to teach them how to do that in a highly professional way. How to teach a student critical thinking skills? I believe, first of all, they have to learn to evaluate themselves. At first lessons with my students in piano class, they mostly get confused when I ask them to analyze their performance, to assess their strengths and weaknesses. Coming from music schools and being highly dependent on opinion of their teacher, they find it extremely complicated to switch to another mode of learning. However, step by step, they learn how to evaluate themselves, define the problems, and eventually solve them. At the same time, they learn how to formulate the tasks they have to undertake to solve those problems. It is this ability that helps them to later express and justify their opinions when they work as teachers, ensemble members, accompanists obliged to discuss problems of interpretation with students and colleagues. I also encourage my students to argue with me over my recommendations and advices if they do not agree with them. However, their argument should be consistent and justified. I do believe that in order to survive in contemporary music world full of famous stars, prize winners, and stereotypes, a musician has to have something that makes him unique and valuable. If we cultivate in our students freedom of thought, supply them with profound knowledge in the related field, teach them how to use this knowledge and how to develop further, we will give them the opportunity to find their own place in a diverse world of music. In 2010, I participated in Junior Fellowship Development Program that enabled me to stay for 1 semester at New England Conservatory, Boston, and to observe their classes. It was while observing classes when I realized how democracy and freedom of thought works in educational system. That was one of the most striking experiences of my professional life. I was born in an authoritarian country, the Soviet Union, with authoritarian educational system. It was not only teacher-centered, but also oriented on children and students of distinguished abilities. This was and still is especially typical for musical education that aims to discover and raise stars, employing strict discipline. There are many cliches about being successful in music in all post-Soviet states. Due to those cliches, students that do not have specific abilities, such as excellent memory, nervous system stability, artistic personality, exceptional technical skills, are not considered appropriate for musical education and career. The most important idea of creating learning approach I got acquainted with in the US is that students working in small teams, each with participants of different levels of ability, use various learning activities and achieve more than students put in individualistic or competitive learning systems. Having generalized this idea, I realized that music education system of post-Soviet countries just does not encourage students of various abilities who could contribute to development of music in different ways, thus discovering particular abilities and talents of students and developing them became the main purpose of my teaching, especially teaching piano. Working with students for several years gives me time to identify their strengths, develop them, and help students to reach their potential by directing their interest in particular directions, be it concert performance, collaborative piano, artistic research, or pedagogy. We all are affected by our professions. Teachers make quite an interesting case in this respect. Having taught for years, we usually forget that we have to learn from time to time in order to be able to teach further. That's why I always try to back to the position of a student, various scholarships I got and programs I participated in as a teacher allow me to observe classes in the US, in Germany, and other countries. Within those programs, not only have I learned from my American and German colleagues how to design and hold courses, how to assess students, but also have experienced student life, doing students' homework on my own initiative. I wanted to make myself fully acquainted with subjects I am particularly interested in, and to look at educational system from students' point of view. I'm especially thankful to orientation courses and summer schools preparing me for my stays in the US, as they introduced to me the most recent and important achievements of the field of general pedagogy. Applying some principles of general pedagogy to musical one have definitely contributed to my professional development as a teacher. I do believe that primary task of supervisor, teacher, is to help a student to finish particularly, let's say, project in time, and to support him, her, to become an independent and critically thinking musician or researcher. The most important challenge is to keep balance between independence and guidance. As a supervisor and teacher, I do provide my students with feedback about their development, and this feedback is not and should not always be positive, but I have never had any problems with negative feedback, as students always know and feel that it is crucially important for their progress, and I consciously act in their best interest. In this regard, it's very helpful that my relationship to my students is intentionally personalized. As an active piano teacher, even in thesis writing, I prefer live sessions over online consultations, though pandemic forces us to employ online lessons actively. Meeting in person and live discussions, in my opinion, always help much better to evaluate the real situation, especially when it comes to specific problems to overcome, such as, for example, writer's block, difficulty finishing repertoire or thesis, issues of time management, stress. Quite often, particular problems are caused by difficulties in other fields of life. I believe that my role is not only to share with students my knowledge and professional experience, but also to give advice on how to overcome the difficulties mentioned above, relying on my own life experience. One of the biggest shocks of my life was to see the fencing construct of New York University Holmes Bob's library. This construct was erected against 12 stocks of books and journals to prevent stressed and tired students from jumping down and committing suicide. The library has been the site of several deaths since 2003. At the same time, I'm aware of the fact that personalized relationship between a supervisor and student should never be too intimate. We have to teach them to solve all kinds of problems independently. So what about freedom in the classroom? My students often tell me that the most important element of my teaching system that supports them during their studies is freedom that I offer them. They always feel free to express their ideas that motivates them to search for them. I'm happy to say that they have never misused my openness, but I am aware of a possibility of such cases, and I'm ready to handle them. The golden rule I learned at one of the forums organizing for supervisors is supervision must be personalized but not intimate. I always follow this rule, and it helps me to avoid complicated situations. As for my rather democratic attitude, it's like any personal trait. It can turn into disadvantage, and I'm aware of this too. That's why I'm very careful while motivating my students to find their own keys of interpretation. I always insist that the process of searching is based on foundational knowledge of a subject, and I know that I always have to develop the skills to provide them with this knowledge. Maybe that's the golden ratio we're searching for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really, yes. It was very interesting and very inspiring. I hope it brings some inspirations to our virtual audience, which we'll have. And basically, actually, what I wanted to have follow-ups, you already had it in your speech, and it was very Very nice. And actually, it reminded me of Isabella Wagner's book, Producing Excellence, The Making of Virtuoso. And she has very strict opinions about it. And basically what she says is that, sometimes we make our teachers as a god person, that they are always right. They have to be always right, and we have to follow every instruction and everything they say. And she has 3 levels of teacher, pupil, and parent relationship. And for earlier stages, the parent is very much involved, and then the only teacher and student stay. But at the higher education that we talk now in music education, the freedom concept, then it's really is about the independent human being, an independent musician that needs to have the freedom of interpretation that we need to find. Yes, thank you very much, Danilo. And now, yes, and now we can move on with next speaker, Tina Leinster. She's PhD and professor of music theory and composition at Capital University in Columbus, Ohio, the US. She completed her undergraduate and graduate studies in Russia and received her PhD in music theory from the Ohio State University. At Capital University, Dr. Leinster has taught music theory, ear training, form and analysis, counterpoint, music history, composition, Russian opera, and a few interdisciplinary courses. Her research, published in the US, Canada, France, Switzerland, Hungary, Ukraine, Georgia, and Lithuania, focuses on multidisciplinary analysis and interpretation of music with poetic, literary, and documentary texts. Thank you, and for being here from the US. It's morning in the US, and the floor is yours now.
Ivry, thank you so much for including me into this important discussion. It is my honor to be here. Before I start addressing the topic of today's gathering, I would like to express my deepest support for the people of Ukraine, and particularly my dear friends and colleagues at the Tchaikovsky Ukrainian National Academy of Music, many of whom have stayed in Kiev and who are facing a very painful reality and very troubling future. So I'm thinking of you, my friends. In my comments, I am going to echo a lot of Nino's points, but I would like to focus on the topics of student-teacher relationship in the contemporary music theory or music history classroom, or all the related disciplines, and some innovating strategies and approaches that have become more and more prevalent in the American higher education, specifically music higher education. As Ivry mentioned, I received my PhD from the Ohio State University here in Columbus, Ohio, where I live. But all my previous undergraduate and graduate studies took place in Russia. Therefore, I myself am a product of the very traditional teacher-centered educational background, where I was taught to how to do things, how to play piano, how to think about music, but most importantly, what to think about music. Not so much how to learn the material myself, how important it is to ask questions, how to question everything, and how often there is no one absolute answer when we're talking about music. Most of the times there is no one absolute answer. But at the same time, I don't want to downplay the strength of the Eastern European music education system, particularly of the 1980s and 1990s, where I was a student, where I learned the foundations of everything I know. And most importantly, the value of being a creative person. I was a composition major in the St. Petersburg Conservatory, and my creativity was encouraged and supported by everybody who taught it there. And that's what leads me to the issue of freedom in the classroom of the third decade of the 20th century, a completely new educational environment in which we are finding ourselves right now. I am working with young people who are very different from me. Some of the students I teach, and they all are seeking Bachelor of Music degree in either music performance, music education, composition, music technology, or music industry. So some of them may have no idea about the Western musical canon or a fully diminished seventh chord. But at the same time, they are privileged to enjoy an instant access to any type of music and any kind of information about music 24 hours a day. These students I'm talking about can use libraries for their research project remotely by wearing pajamas in their dormitories. They can study scores of great composers online for free. They can study abroad almost anywhere. Furthermore, their musical career goals may not include playing flute in New York Philharmonic, but maybe composing music for video games or performing as a singer-songwriter in some music club, I don't know, in Nashville, Tennessee. So for the longest time, I believe that having high standards in my teaching and inspiring students to achieve them would make them better musicians, no matter what they do, which ultimately would lead them to successful careers in music. That's what I thought. But now, with easily noticeable cultural shift, I'm finding myself on a new ground, grappling with these questions and more so every year. Questions are, how can I better relate to my students? How do I teach the students something that they can actually use in their projected careers? What is my function as a teacher? If my students can simply Google the content of the classes and they can find a perfectly satisfactory free lesson on YouTube on the diminished seventh chords or in sonata allegro form, what is it that only I can give my students and the virtual world that is their fingertips cannot? And what I found through going to teaching workshops and conferences, reflecting a lot and learning from my successful peers, what I learned is that passive learning works only for some students who are already independent, self-directed learners. And then there is a big difference between the information and the knowledge. I can teach my students how to find information, but I cannot construct their knowledge. Only they can. So I changed my mind. I decided that perhaps in this new to me cultural context, my job is to create an inviting, non-judgmental learning environment in which all my students, no matter how strong or weak they may be, would be comfortable discovering themselves as musicians and as learners. Through this approach coined by educational theorist, student-centered teaching and learning, I'm trying to provide my students with tools, both specific to a particular class with its own learning outcomes, and some more general tools contributing to mastering critical thinking and critical listening skills. Based on my teaching experience, I'm confident that unless my students believe they can benefit from the knowledge I'm helping them to construct, my teaching efforts are futile. Implementing this teaching philosophy is not easy, and I have been trying to master it with some successes and many failures for the past 15 years. And I'm trying to do it in my different courses: music history, music theory and harmony, form and analysis, counterpoint. And I have seen it done by some of my music colleagues here at Capital University in their classes and even ensembles such as in choir. This approach entails something that is very difficult to swallow. I would have to give up to some extent the power and the ultimate authority of myself as a teacher. when I accept a role of a facilitator and mentor instead of my students' musical profit, I need to embrace all the differences in students' music sensibility, students' ability, or honestly, inability to articulate their ideas and their previous knowledge, and their differing work ethics, because not everybody has that. In order to keep this creative and fruitful dialogue with the students, I needed to use specific strategies that both place students in the center of my teaching universe, but at the same time, keep them accountable for their process of learning. So here I'm just gonna offer a few highlights. First, I utilize what is known as flipped classroom approach, where students come to class after they already explore a new material themselves, using a textbook, Google, whatever they want. And they would complete a homework or a project, which is, by the way, not unlike piano professors expect students to come to their first lesson with the music memorized. Don't you think so? I remember it was shocking to me, and it happened when I was composition major in St. Petersburg Conservatory. I was mortified by that expectation. So I am there to help students to master and apply the new material, but not to introduce it initially. I let them deal with it themselves at their own time. In other words, I should not be delivering information students have at their textbook and at their fingertips. Second, it is very important to solicit students' reflections and their self-assessment of their learning experiences. And I use those as a feedback for me, informing me whether my teaching strategies work at all, or I would have to adjust them if they don't. This can be done by utilizing learning journals or learning portfolios or 1-minute papers that students can complete the class in 60 seconds, but it's priceless information for me as a pedagogue. Next, I think it's very important to utilize a peer reliance system where students work in teams, and you already mentioned it, to either obtain information, discuss information, practice, formulate their questions, and then interact with other teams and with me as a facilitator. Fourth point, it is also very important to create a routine in our classes that engages both the course content and creative thinking. And most importantly, it should feel like discovery for students. For example, students come to my form and analysis class with the entry ticket, where they would need to determine and argue for a form of a assigned composition, be it like binary, ternary, free form, but they have to argue why they decided it's such, and it should be like informed argument, not just because I feel so. And they would leave classroom with the exit ticket, where they would need to answer one tiny question or articulated thought that has something to do with something small to do with what we just discussed in class. So this is kind of routine that worked for me in that class. So these are just few examples of student-centered teaching that focuses on the active engagement of students in their learning. Not all of my students will end up professional musicians, not at all. But I hope after taking my classes, they would have more confidence in being able to learn new things and ultimately work toward their perhaps changing life goals. I truly believe that in the contemporary environment, in higher music education institution, a student-teacher relationship must be fluid and flexible, where each party is constantly learning from one another and thus developing, growing, and transforming together. There should be freedom to teach what is being needed to be learned. and that particular moment in time. And it requires dedication, trust, and a lot of creativity, which is arguably a true meaning of academic freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was really, really interesting. And actually, like I always say that we are really surrounded with this Europe-centered environment, and which is more conservative. Even if you go to more progressive countries, it is still more conservative than the US. And it is always interesting to hear the other experiences, other methods. And I see that, like, for example, when we're talking about this student-centered education, like we go further, and we don't only want to have the student-centered, but also they to make initiatives and to be student-centered, and also student be there when they make their own study plans, when they make our plans about their future developments. And also, like when it comes to the when you mentioned that yeah, and like not everyone becomes the professional musicians in the end. Yeah, because it is all about the well-being of the students, and also the including everyone. So the question of the inclusion and diversity, which might sound that it is progressive and it is something new. No, it's there, and we just need to discover it. So thank you very much. And our next speaker is Danilo Mastertech. He is a pianist from Italy, and he's a member of the Como International Piano Academy, the Carn Trust Junior Fellow at the Royal College of Music of London, also artistic director of Arte Solidale Festival. And Danilo, the floor is yours, and we'll be really listening to you to share your experience, because I know you've been busy all these years with different festivals, different academies, different concerts. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to say thanks to also Nino and Dina for their speeches, because I feel like I learned a lot in these few minutes, and I hope I can give some good insights as well. I also want to spend a few words about the situation in Ukraine, as I think it's my duty. And since that as artists find themselves in a very difficult situation nowadays, and especially we know that there's a lot of political things going on with Russian artists, I don't want to spend my personal words, but to read a very short poem by Salvatore Quasimodo, one of the main Italian poets who wrote this poem during the Second World War, and I think that his words still apply to every situation of war, and especially to this one. The poem is called Upon the Willows. I'm not a good reader, but I hope his words are going to be more important than my performance of it. Upon the Willows by Salvatore Quasimodo. And how could we sing with a foreign hill on our hearts, among the dead abandoned in the squares, on the hard and frozen grass, to the lament of innocent children, to the dark cry of the mother hastening to her son crucified on a telegraph pole. Upon the willows, we too, as an offering, hung our harps, which swayed quietly in the sad wind. Thank you. And my support, of course, goes to Ukraine, and I hope that the situation will solve very quickly and will let us go back to our normal activities, especially for that part of the world that is now hit by this tragedy. Going back to our topic, I can't offer an insight as a professor, as I taught only a very few pupils in my life, but I'm still a senior student in an academy, and I am planning to take further studies next. So what I can offer is an insight on the current situation as a young-ish performer who is going in between the concert career and the academic career at the same time. So I am very glad that we all agree that initiative, freedom, and independent and critical thinking, as well as creativity, are fundamental parts of nowadays artists and students. And it's beautiful to see that professors still care about it and don't just want to teach their way and go to bed and be happy about it, and that's it. So for us, it's very important to see that there are so many professors around the world that really care about these. And I myself have been very lucky in these, because I think I always found, or actually chose to stay with, professors who gave me trust, and especially gave me the feeling that what I was trying to do in the class and in the exam was listened to in a very specific way, so that my choices were considered and what I was trying to say was discussed and not just checked if it was what the teacher wanted or not. And so I think that as a young musician nowadays, we have to answer the main question, which is, what's our role? When in a time that is very different from the Soviet times, but also very different from 20 years ago, because nowadays we can listen to recordings not in the same way that we could do that in the 90s. If the compact discs were a revolution, nowadays we can listen to any recording within 5 minutes. And so why would a young student play again a Chopin ballade or a Tchaikovsky violin concerto? Where is the sense of doing that when anyone can just listen to a possibly better or as good version on YouTube or wherever else? So I think that today the key solution is indeed your personal creativity. And I would like to focus my few minutes of speech on, rather than the professor, which was outlined by my colleagues already, on the institutions, because of course you do need a good professor, and that's probably just about luck or the ability of the student to cope and choose the right professor, and probably the professors to be able to say to the student, you're the right student for me, or you should rather go to this other professor. But also I think that nowadays institutions and in general the system of the music world, they also play a key role in the student education. So for me it's very important to try to analyze how each institution is facilitating the student to become an artist, or is on the other hand just trying to get them have a degree and try to get a job. And I can bring my own experience because I studied in Milano as well as in London, and I'm now in this Lake Como Piano Academy, which has a very specific program, and I also studied with Russian teachers in private academies. So I more or less have a very European education of the nowadays situation. And so I would first want to focus on the preparation of the students for what concerns exams, competitions, international competitions, and in general the work of the student. So we can see that there are quite a few differences between what is happening in Italy at the moment and what is happening in London. Because on one hand, about my experience in Italy, I could see that the system was created quite well and let the student be very free, but at the same time there were no programs that would really help this freedom and creativity to develop. While on the other hand, for instance, in England I can see that exams are still very strict on some specific choices of repertoire and so on, but at the other hand the institution tries to make the student develop creativity with certain specific programs, which I'm going to illustrate very quickly. First of all, for what regards the main difference of the English and Southern Europe tradition, I would say is that the English tradition, as well I believe the American one, are based on the ABRSM grade exams. So we have all the kids, for instance in London, from when they're 5 to when they're around 18, or earlier if they're faster, they do the so-called grade exams. So they have choices, but these choices come from lists. They're not their personal choices. So everyone ends up normally playing the same pieces or similar pieces that are just on a paper. And you choose it with your teacher and you go ahead, learn it during the whole year, and then play your exam and goodbye. And then one arrives at college and suddenly has to prepare a recital or a concert for something. And there comes the important role of the teacher to help you in that, because this system maybe didn't really help on that thing. While on the other hand, in Italy, there is no such a thing like exams for younger children. Before we had sort of junior conservatoire, which now doesn't exist anymore. So it's almost all about just one-to-one teaching, like in most piano and instrumental teaching traditions. And then one starts the exams, and at that point we have again the choice of recitals and so on. And I have to say that in my experience, that moment is really about how the judgment happens in the institution that you are part of. And that really depends not just about who is judging you, but how this system is planned to help the judgment. For instance, I always found very fair and useful the fact that an institution would choose to have an external professor to judge exams rather than professors from the conservatoire, because that is really helpful for the student to know that someone who doesn't know you personally is going to just listen to how you play and is not going to take into account how you work during the whole year. Because of course, someone is going to be able to say, well, this professor never liked me, so I'm not going to get a good grade, so why should I make an effort in this exam? Or on the other hand, it could be that this professor doesn't know me at all, so it's just going to listen to how I play, and that's it. And in this moment is where I think creativity plays a very strong role, because of course every exam in every institution has some guidelines which are different, but more or less we know that a student is going to learn all the repertoire. But problem is that going to be, is creativity going to be a part that is going to be valued during the exam or not? And I believe that this is really connected to the level of the institution and not the level of, I don't know, the facilities of the institution, but the reputation of the institution. Because normally we know that institutions that are considered to be very good are considered so because they have many students that do take part in international competitions, or students that have successful careers, as well as professors that have successful careers. So in this way, we can understand that the planning for exams is going to be quite different from an institution where everyone is just, I don't know, a regional conservatoire where no one really ever went to play concerts or these kind of things. And so in this way, I believe that the place where there are people that are able to plan ahead, so for future career steps, are the places where creativity can be developed in the best way. So for instance, this brings us to think about the competition part. I want to analyze this part because I believe that that's what a lot of students aim to do or tend to do because it's the normal path. Thinking of piano, obviously one knows that it's gonna or do competitions or going into teaching immediately, or possibly going to do competition, get some experience, and then going to teach. And so if one student is doing competitions or is preparing for competitions, is probably gonna take exams in a certain way that can help to prepare for the competition as well, and so on. And I am talking about all these parts because I'm trying to understand whether creativity can exist in these kind of things, in competitions, in exams or not. And I do believe that normally it can, but as Nino already said earlier, it's always related to high quality. And in my experience, both the conservatoires that I attended valued creativity during exams and competitions, internal competition as well as preparation for external competitions very much, but they always expected that the highest quality was there before the choices that could be edgy or a bit different. And in this way, I do believe that I was helped very much by both institutions I was part of, because they were both institutions where they would care about exams very much, but they also would care about the external situations very much. So in general, I could say, or I believe I could say, that the institution becomes extremely helpful towards creativity and towards independency when it has a very good idea of what's happening outside and is not just focused on the degree program, on the fact that students go there to get their degree and then go. The institution that best work today is towards the new artist that knows what's his role, that knows what's his own signature of the pieces that they decide to play or to focus on, are those that really understand what's around the institution, not just the institution itself. And some institutions try to go deeper on these and not only rely on the professor's ability, which of course is the main thing of an institution, but also to create programs that try to make the students develop their own creativity within the context of the university, but without the professor's help. And so, for instance, the Royal College of Music has one career center, which was the first one in Europe, and then they started to exist also in other institutions in London, as well as I know in Germany they have many career centers and so on. And it's another office that is not connected to the music departments, where they do try to help students with their careers, as in put them outside of the school. And at the same time, the same career center, in this case of the Royal College, created a sort of mini festival called Great Exhibitionist, which was not part of the piano competitions inside the school, not part of the concerto competitions, for instance, but it was just a completely different kind of competition judged by other people, not the music professors. And it was about ideas. So they just created this sort of festival as a competition for proposals, and the best ones would get to be performed and especially to be funded. So this helped greatly the students because they were able to just think of a project, realize it, made a business plan about it, and just develop it if it was successful. And I believe that even though maybe other professors would think that one should focus just on playing the piano all day, which is of course very useful, at the same time, these kind of projects would help a lot the students to focus on understanding what it means to create a project, to create a concept also that is maybe not necessarily the same thing of I'm just going to play a recital, and transform it into reality. And so I believe if on one hand we have the support of professorships in the institutions, especially those that are open to the external situations, also the other departments of a university play a key role today in the students' development. And this brings me to my activity as an artistic director of this festival, because in this way I also have experience in what happens when you plan a concert, when you invite someone and you have to make the audience come to that concert. Because if inside a school, an institution, you have in the end to get the students get a good degree, when then they are done with their careers, as you know, it's where everything starts. It's where you see if your personality is working towards a market of music that is not easy at all or not. And the problem is that nowadays audiences are still probably looking for what was the golden age of music making, if we think of big concerts by Horowitz and so on, and normal audiences still want to go to listen to that. But at the same time, we young artists want to be independent, want to be creative, want to find our ways to make it, to go in the market. And so I could say that as a concert planning today, it's very important to find a good balance between sharing the great tradition and keep remembering about how important it is to still perform Chopin ballade, but at the same time make the audience aware that it's not the only thing that exists. And this plays a key important role in our society nowadays, because this is what we are going to be able to offer to the next generation of musicians. Otherwise, people are just going to be happy to listen to the CD by Vladimir Horowitz rather than coming to our concerts. And so far, the solution that I found in this chamber music festival, which I direct, is to always be aware of the two different parts, the tradition and the initiative, and try to connect them in a way that the audience is going to be able to appreciate both parts. For instance, I remember that one time we planned a concert with a title in English because it worked for the grammar, but it would not work for the audience because the audience would think, this is strange. Why would I come to this when I can just go to the Bach Vivaldi concert? And but then the concert itself was a very normal concert with some poetry, some new music, but also some Bach and Vivaldi. So we just changed the title, and before the bookings ended, we called it Bach and Vivaldi and poetry, and the hall was full in the end. And then people would really appreciate the part that was the new music. It was full of new improvisations and new compositions by the players. And they went there to ask them who wrote this beautiful thing. So it was all about just understanding how to sell it, basically. And this makes me go back to the institution talk, because how to sell it is probably the very difficult topic that nowadays we are always trying to understand within our education, because very often very good professors that can teach us how to be a personalized player, they often have no idea how to make it in the career world. And that's very frustrating sometimes, because they are exceptional professors, but they just have no idea what's happening around. And so this is why I keep underlining the importance of an institution that is aware of what's happening around, because without that, even if you become a very good player, you're never going to play anywhere. And despite it's not important for the art, it's important to survive and work. And without that, you cannot develop as an artist, because you can be the best possible artist ever, but you do need to be able to sell what you're doing so that you can then develop it somewhere. And so I could just finish saying that I believe that institutions and festivals and all the people that are connected to the artistic world and to the concerts world are possibly as important as professors. And what we should try to find nowadays is to link these professorships and managers, institutions, concerts managers together in a better way, because so far it was created so that it would work in a world that existed 40 years ago. But today's we really need this connection to be stronger, much stronger, so that a young player can develop all the skills that are required by nowadays concert scene, and be able not only to make it, but to make it in the good way, to be an exceptional player, but to be able to have concerts, and not to be just an average strong player who gets concerts because he's a strong, that he has very good skills. But at the same time, what we really would like to achieve is to have a great personality, a great musician that is able to cope with today's market and today's music scene. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danilo. It was very inspiring, and I think your oral autoethnography, if I can call that, really gave some new ideas to all of us and to our virtual audience as well. And I think I had for the conclusion of the meeting some quotes, some questions by Daniel Lee Wilkinson ready, and I think you tackled some of them actually, and during your speech. He's a musicologist and also emeritus professor at King's College London, and he asked, like, why are performers trained to sing and play scores with such a narrow range of interpretative freedom? Why aren't performances much more varied? why are critics so set against performances that differ from the norm? Why is faithfulness to the composer valued so much more highly in classical music than in classical theater? And then there comes also the concept of Werkfeuer, right? The faithfulness to the original, that we try to be true to the score, to follow the instructions, to be accurate and stylistically correct. There are main ideas, and the focus is this is the focus for the classical musicians, but at the same time, it's not enough. And at the same time, the musician must also interpret the work with the aim of realizing the intentions of the composers. And I really want to thank you very much. We don't have so much time left, but I really want to give you maybe 1 or 2 minutes, each of you, to kind of conclude the meeting, and also the answer my question, which would be about the balance, like how do we keep the balance between like creativity, innovation, and also tradition, and having this concept of working hard or working smart, and creating the repertoire thoughtfully, as Danilo mentioned, for example, for the concerts. And also in Sweden, they always try, like, they have like Beethoven Symphony, and then they have Caroline Show, for example, who her like famous, already famous 2018 concert, Water Drop, and they played in with Helsingborg Symphony Orchestra, and that was amazing how these two, like 3-century difference, can go together very well. Okay, maybe we can start with Dina now, and then we continue with Nino, and Danilo can finish.
Sure, thank you very sure that I'm not sure. I think we are in transitional period right now. We are understanding that what I call student-centered, and that's what actually Danilo was talking about, right? How to make sure that the students, undergraduate, graduate students, have successful careers and connect with the audience in case of the pianists, right? How do we accept that every musician, every performer performing music becomes music? How do we accept that not only Glenn Gould can be Glenn Gould with his sometimes arbitrary choices? I think it will take us time to create the audience that will transition together with us. But I think this is the direction we are going into, and it will encourage plurality, and it will encourage repertoires that combine, as again Danilo outlined, music of Vivaldi and Bach, and as you ever said, Carolyn Shaw. I think it's ahead of us. For classical music, for serious music, for art music not to die, we need to meet our new audience halfway and create experiences for them that they feel as co-creators of music that they're listening to. Because I believe the music happens between the performer and the audience member. So that's what music is for me. And this is what I'm trying to do in my teaching, helping my students to become those people who become music for their generations and the next generation.
Thank you. Maybe Nino, you could say some words at the end.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank, I had no opportunity to that, to thank Dina and Danilo for very, very interesting and inspiring speeches, and unfortunately we don't have time so that I could reflect upon some of the issues that they touched, but I hope we will stay in contact and have the opportunity to ask you questions maybe later when this is finished, our session. As for your question, it's so difficult to answer some of your questions in 2 minutes, but again, I will say, I remember Kandinsky wrote once that the most important function, I'm paraphrasing him, of art is that it should reflect the spirit of its epoch. And I think our epoch is the epoch of democracy and the epoch of freedom, because never in the history of the world has been, it could be better, but that's democratic. And this democracy could be applied to interpretation, because you mentioned very interesting questions. Yes, Ivari. It could be applied to compiling the programs. And I think if we find once again the right key of interpretation, Beethoven could really suit jazz, or even if you find the right key, Lady Gaga. And if that's the most important, once again, word, that every meaning we know depends on the key of interpretation. I think the only thing that we have to do is to think and to find those keys, and then everything could be justified if we really try to do that. I think that's my answer.
And Dina actually mentioned that the music is like there maybe not be the answers. It's like the qualitative research. You need to have the open question. It cannot be like yes or no, or yes, it is good or bad. It's always open. So I don't expect to have the answers. We have the interpretation, right? We have interpretation of the answers.
Once again,
absolutely.
They're interpreters, and we're good at interpretation.
Yes. Danilo?
So of course it's very hard to answer to this kind of question, and especially I don't have the same talking skills of my colleagues, but what I can add probably is that we music people are the artists who engage with the audience, and we should never forget that we are going to create the taste for the next generations, for our listeners. It's not the audience or the concert managers that decide. They do come to the concerts and everything, but it's up to us to make them like the new contemporary music world that we are going to put in the program, or our personal interpretation of the most mainstream work, or anything else. And it's only up to us as a community to try to work towards that, because of course there are many things. We know that there are a lot of competitions that are killing the taste of music nowadays, as well as many music managers that just play safe because they want the people to come to the concert rather than making artistic choices. But it's up to our community to create what's going to be the next music situation for the next 20 years. And if we don't do that, it's always gonna stay to let's do some Bach because that's easy, and it's probably gonna be very average played Bach. And I would say that we should never forget that those concert pianists or big conductors that we remember, that we think that they did only the things that we like, they actually did that because Horowitz premiered Barber Sonata, or we have conductor that premiered, I don't know, other Barber works, or all the new works by Shostakovich. That was edgy choices of repertoire back then, and we should keep doing that instead of just playing safe because it's easier and we think it's right. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And I think like the modern performance will get more like better gigs and better concerts if they play like unusual so-called repertoire, if then playing their only Bach or Beethoven or etc. I just want to make sure that we are on the right track, and I'm so happy to have you as the opening speakers for the first meeting of the international discussion series Freedom in Music Education. For the disclaimer to the audience, I want to state that the opinions that you might hear is the personal opinions and might not represent the official opinion by the Tbilisi State Conservatory. And for the next week, we meet for the second session, and it will be on Tbilisi State Conservatory Facebook page live on 7th of March, 4 p.m. CET, which is the 7 p.m. Tbilisi time. See you next time, and thank you again to our participants.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.